As I understand it, you are reading Ephesians this month. An interesting choice of a letter. You probably already know. It's written. It has Paul's name on it, but it's. You'll talk in a couple weeks, I think, about the idea of someone writing in Paul's name, sort of from his imagined perspective, maybe a little bit after him.
That's too bad.
What I'm going to talk about is the social context that he would have ministered in. There are chairs up front if you want to grab them and put them back. So what we're going to do is just sort of situate Paul by imagining what it would be like to be Jewish in the Roman world. In Palestine, and then further out in the diaspora, in Asia Minor, where he is working. And then I have a little bit on what Paul sounds like, what his letters would sound like in such a context. So first, being Jewish in the Roman Empire. Palestine is occupied, as you probably know. At this time, they lost their sort of self-determination in 586 BC. The temple was destroyed, and the Babylonian exile happened. For about 50 years, they weren't in their area at all. They were taken as captives and couldn't get to move. And then the Persian king Cyrus grants them some measure of independence, and they can go home. So all those texts that we read in Isaiah about valleys being lifted up and mountains being made low and a path being made through the wilderness, that's all material we think that's connected to this time of going home way back about 500 years before Jesus. They get home, and of course they come back to rubble. There's nothing really left. And they spend the next century under various foreign powers. First Persia, then Greece, then Rome. And here is the Roman Empire at the time of Jesus. And you've got Jerusalem way down here, little tiny Judea, and Rome on the other side of the map. And then Asia Minor calls here for his, I don't know how much you can even see back there, but you can probably see Philippi and Thessalonica and Macedonia. This is Corinth. And this is water and islands and stuff. It's not like, what happened to the landmass? I looked at that for a long time thinking, what are they doing? But that's a way to talk about, a way to see islands. And then if you're curious, I just have 3 slides all morning, so we won't do a lot of this, but here's the modern countries in the same space. So you can see Libya and Jerusalem, Israel here. I left the cities on where Paul, that were associated with Paul, but put the modern countries over. Okay? So I think we'll just go back. Oh, that's really small. We'll leave that one. So by about the time of Jesus, and Jesus and Paul are roughly, we think, the same age, so contemporaries. You know, of course, Paul wasn't one of the 12 disciples. We don't have any record that he connected with Jesus himself at all during Jesus' lifetime. Although he says at one point that he used to know the Lord kata sarka, in Greek, according to the flesh in English. And some people think, well, what is that? Does that mean he knew Jesus during his earthly ministry, or is Paul making a theological point that he understood him in a sort of human way? And then he comes to understand him in his actual status as the Son of God. I'm not sure, but I think it's reasonably clear that whatever Paul knows, he doesn't know very much at all about Jesus' earthly ministry, and likely never ran into him. So in the time of Jesus, the temple has been rebuilt. Remember, baby Jesus goes to the temple, and the 12-year-old Jesus goes to the temple. There's interaction of Jesus and the temple. That is the temple that was rebuilt after the Babylonian exile, and then built onto for years and years, centuries, and finally sort of finished in the 1st century. Herod is a client king of Rome. Rome generally respected ancient practices, and it tried to use local religion and custom as much as it could. It didn't have an interest in wiping that stuff out if the local practices were able to support Roman rule. And Herod and people like him were more than happy to be co-opted by Rome and to keep a position of authority. So Herod is a client king. Jews were exempt from military service and from participation in what I'll talk about as the imperial cult, or a religion of seeing the emperor as a god. Sort of respected because their traditions were so old. And sort of respected because their moral teachings were clear, and think about the 10 Commandments, or love God, love your neighbor. This would have been respected in Rome. But they're still known as outsiders, and they keep themselves apart with things like different religious practices, different eating practices, and so any group that sort of keeps itself apart, imagine not standing up at the Star-Spangled Banner in a ball game, or not taking your cap off, and saying, "Well, this is about my religion." There's a way in which whenever you aren't part of the surrounding culture, people might be okay with a lot of what you're about, but they're also going to look at you just a little askance. And from time to time in Rome, Jews are under some persecution as well. We think there were probably 3 to 8 million Jews, which means we don't know, right? Think about that number. 3 to 8 million Jews. There are millions of Jews in the late 1st century. There's a thriving Jewish community all the way in Rome. Now, and I've tried to do some work on this, and Phil or others may know more than I do about it. How did we get a thriving Jewish community in Rome at least 2 centuries before Christ? What were those people doing over there? I mean, they went here, they went this direction when they were exiled, and somehow they get to Rome. I asked my husband Hank, and he said it was about money. It was about, and that's as good a guess as any. There's commerce, there's trade, there's decent roads, and that's a center of commerce and education and so on. And so they get to these big centers: Alexandria, Antioch, Rome. And 20 to 50,000 Jews in Rome by the birth of Christ. Again, we don't know, but how many? We're guessing. Tens of thousands. In the year 49 CE or AD, Claudius expels the Jews in Rome. He's the emperor, and there's a problem. Kicks them out, and we know about this also not just from extra biblical sources, but in Acts. Priscilla and Aquila are Roman Jewish Christians who are forced out of Rome for at least a time. People couldn't tell the difference. Why am I spending? One of the reasons I'm spending so much time on what it means to be a Jew in this period is because Jesus and Paul were both Jews in this period, and also because outsiders couldn't immediately tell the difference between Jews who believed Jesus was the Messiah and Jews who didn't. This was an intrafamilial conversation for decades. I think probably 100 or so Christians are starting to differentiate themselves from synagogues and from Jewish gatherings. But before that, it's just two different ways of being Jewish. You think Jesus is the Messiah, and that leads you to certain conclusions about how the Gentiles are part of God's people and so on. That's where Paul is. Or you don't think Jesus is the Messiah. And probably there's some people who think Jesus is the Messiah and think that the Gentiles get in by keeping the law. So Paul fights with people like that, both Messianic Jews, both groups Messianic Jews, thinking Jesus is it, but then disagreeing on what that means for how God's people are being gathered now. I teach Matthew at Luther Seminary as well, and the Gospel of Matthew doesn't have a ton of stuff in it that would lead you to believe that the law, keeping the law, was not a great idea for Christians. In other words, I asked my colleague Arlen Holgren once, do you think Matthew's community, the community that produced that gospel, were they law-observant Christians, Jewish Christians mostly? Did they think, wow, God is doing this amazing thing in Jesus, and that calls us into a community with Gentiles where we all keep kosher, basically, where we all keep the law. And Arlen said, I don't know. Twice in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus quotes Hosea, who is quoting God. Go and learn what this means, Jesus says, and then he quotes Hosea, I desire mercy and not sacrifice. So is there a way that the sacrificial elements of Judaism, even for that very almost maybe law-observant community, are done? Maybe so. That's a side note on Matthew.